Okay, guys, so I'm freezing, hence the robe. It's getting to be that time of year here in Tennessee where it's just gonna start being cold as hell. My house is kind of like really old. It's actually a building that a artist was using as a studio, and these really awesome people redid it, made it super cool and custom, and it's beautiful. But the downside is I'm cold all the time once it gets to be a certain temperature, and that temperature is now upon us. So I'm wearing this robe, and then I'm going to turn this video off and I'm going to film my other video for Patreon this week, and I'll probably be wearing like a hoodie or a sweatshirt. So sorry I'm not rolling out the red carpet in terms of like fancy dress, but today I wanted to do something kind of fall, and shh, don't tell anybody. I'm going to use a few things that are not in my capsule wardrobe that I actually just purchased. That's right, I broke the no-buy. I feel like all year, if that's all I did, it's not so bad. I was in Georgia, as some of you guys know, for my sister's wedding, and I had to take her shopping for makeup for her wedding, and a couple things for me ended up in my bag. What can I say? I am only human. So yeah, those things are showing up in this video. But let's just get started. I'm going to be working as usual, primarily out of the Jaclyn Hill and Morphe palette and the Dominique Cosmetics Latte palette. So when I was about 14, I was spending the night at one of my friend's houses, and she had a book on her bookshelf called Precious Angels. I picked it up, started reading it, and lo and behold, my 14-year-old mind is completely blown by the story of Darlie Routier and her two sons. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this case before. It is still something I think about all the time. Recently, 2020 did another special about this case. You can probably find it on YouTube. So Darlie and her husband, Darren, meet in Lubbock, Texas. Darlie's mom was a waitress at a restaurant that Darren worked at, and she kind of set the two of them up. It was very love at first sight, and they quickly fell in love, got married. Darlie was pregnant, and soon after she had her first son, they moved to a suburb outside of Dallas, Texas. Darlie and Darren were married pretty young, in their early 20s, and kind of did something pretty radical for people in their early 20s, which is that they found themselves to be extremely financially secure. Which I don't know about you guys, but I was none of those things in my early 20s. I was quite a shit show. So the funny thing about this case is, like I told you, I heard about it when I was 14, and I think something happens to you when you find certain materials or information at a certain age. Is like, in my mind, you know, 24, 25, 26 was super old, and like now this whole story is even crazier to me, knowing how incredibly young both of them were when this whole thing transpired. Like, early 20s is super young. The financial success came from the fact that Darren had a company called Tessneck, and it did extremely well. It was profitable very quickly. They were able to buy a house in a very affluent suburb outside of Dallas. Darren was able to buy a Jaguar. He had a 30-foot cabin cruiser. Darlie had beautiful jewelry, furs. Like, they were a well-off couple. They were well known in the area. Darlie was a very hands-on, dedicated mother, just kind of truly living the American dream. So one thing you have to keep in mind about this entire case, and I'm just trying to set the scene for you, is that around the time that Darlie's two children were murdered, there was a case that kind of reached a huge level of sensation in the country, and that was the case of Susan Smith. Susan Smith was a woman who claimed her two young children were kidnapped. She said that someone took her car with her two children in it, disappeared. She went on the news kind of crying and begging for someone to safely return her children. It was kind of like a manhunt. You know, who took this woman's poor children? It was a big deal. And about a week after all of this, she came out and said that, in fact, none of that had happened. She had actually driven her children into a lake, and they consequently drowned as a result of that. It was a big deal, this kind of story of not only a mother killing her children, but also a mother saying that someone else was responsible for it when she, in fact, was the guilty party. I bring this up because with this case, it has been considered solved, but what really gets me about it and continues to blow my mind about it is that a lot of this doesn't make sense to me, and I actually think Darlie is innocent. So keep that in mind throughout this entire story. I'm going to be as unbiased as I can while I tell the story, but that's just where I am with the whole thing. So 11 months after the Susan Smith case, on June 6, 1996, Darlie was sleeping downstairs with her 2 older boys. She had actually recently given birth to a 3rd son, and the baby tended to keep her awake at night. The crib was in the room that she shared with Darren. She went downstairs to sleep with the boys, and that's not unusual. I know that most of the time when I was little, if me and my sister were like having a slumber party in the living room, which was always just like the most fun thing in the world, right? My mom would usually at least sleep on the couch for a little bit if she didn't stay there all night. So apparently Darren and Darlie stayed up pretty late into the night after the boys went to sleep downstairs, just kind of talking and hanging out. They stayed up pretty late into the night, hanging out downstairs until Darren retired to go upstairs and go to sleep. Then at around 2:30 a.m. in the morning, Darlie says that she was awoken because she felt kind of like a pressure on her shoulder, as if somebody was trying to wake her. It was in fact her son, Damon, and he was just saying, "Mommy, Mommy." She said she woke up and saw a man walking away from her on the couch, and he was walking into their utility room, and the utility room attached to the garage. Like most people kind of have a laundry room that attaches to the garage in these types of homes, so that's where he walked. She couldn't catch up to him, she said, but she did notice in the utility room on the floor there was a bloody knife, and her first instinct was to pick the knife up. At this time, she realizes she is completely covered in blood, and she immediately begins screaming for her husband. Darren runs downstairs, finds an absolute bloodbath. Both of the boys have clearly been stabbed. Darren says that he immediately ran to go give his oldest son CPR, and this is so heartbreaking. He said that when he blew air into the little boy's mouth, just like air and sprays of blood just came right out of his little chest. This makes me so sad to think about. I can't even imagine. The interesting thing about this part of the story is, as I told you in the intro, they being 2020 recently did a new kind of episode about the Darlie Routier case, and this would have been 25 years after the inciting incident. And the way that Darren tells the story of what happened hasn't changed. Like, there was a 2020 that was done like in 2000, 2001. And then here's one that was done 18 years later. And the way he describes what happened, he says he runs downstairs and Darlie is going, "Devin, Devin, 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 Devin." Like, she just can't stop saying his name. Like, she's freaking out. And for me, when it comes down to stories and trying to figure out what happened, I pay attention to consistency in stories. And the fact that his hasn't changed a single note in that many years really makes me continue to believe that Darlie did not do this. But there is some things that are going to make you think that maybe she did. I know, it's very interesting. I can't wait to hear you guys' theories. And I kind of want to make the live stream this month about this. I want to talk about it and see what you guys think, because this drives me crazy. But anyway, so after Darren gives his son CPR, attempts to give him CPR, Darlie immediately calls 911. The 911 call is horrific, as are any 911 calls in my opinion, honestly. But the thing about this one, so many people have picked this 911 call apart, and what they tend to point out is her verbiage about her boys. Like, at sometimes she calls them her babies. At sometimes she calls them her boys. Sometimes she says they're dead. Sometimes she says that they're dying. And I get it. Like, there's been tons of instances, like with the JonBenet case, for example, people have looked really hard at Patsy Ramsey's initial 911 call, and they see so many flaws with what she says. And I understand that that is a good point of reference to maybe try to figure out if there's like inconsistencies in somebody's story. But to me, for some reason, it drives me a little nuts when people are so quick to pick apart the way that someone reacts in a situation that you can't even fathom. I don't know what I would do if I came into my living room and, God forbid, my family was murdered. Like, I don't think anything I said or did would make sense. I mean, I just don't think you know what you're going to do till you're in that situation. I bring this all up to say that you guys should go try to find a version of the 911 call. See if it just seems a little fishy to you. It doesn't to me. It sounds like a woman who was completely horrified and something terrible just happened to her kids. But what she kept saying to the dispatcher was, they just stabbed me and my children, my little boys, my babies are dead, my babies are dying. And at one point she says, I think I'm dying. And a lot of people have pointed out that that's really strange because they think it's odd that Darlie is talking about herself, but Darlie herself has been severely injured, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Some people think she was talking about, like, my babies are dying, I'm dying, like, this is killing me to see kind of thing. I don't know why this matters, but some people found it odd that she said that, but she quite literally could have been dying. Like, she got some pretty serious injuries in this situation. Anyway, so when she's on the phone with the dispatcher, she is saying, some man came in, stabbed my baby, stabbed me. I woke up. I was fighting. He ran out through the garage and threw the knife down. I bring this up because, by the way, this is one of the things that's not in my capsule collection and that I broke my no-buy for. This is the MAC Dazzle Shadow Liquid eyeshadow in the color Rayon Rays. Almost all of my liquid shadows or cream shadows that I have right now are about to turn. They're expiring. They're not working anymore. So I'm slowly just picking up a few here and there. And these actually are pretty nice. I've played with them a little bit. They're really beautiful. I feel like if I'm going to start getting back into buying makeup, or as I start to up on things, I'm probably going to go back to MAC because I think they're the OGs for a reason. Like, their stuff is so good. Like, look how pretty that is. But anyway, she told the dispatcher that she fought off the man and then he ran into the utility room. And the only reason that strikes me as odd every time I hear it is because usually when you hear the story, she says that she was awoken by her son, telling her, that whole mommy thing he was pushing on her chest. But she says that she knew she fought him off while she's on the phone. This whole part of her story, this whole part of the case, I think ends up being one of the major points of contention for everyone who believes that Darlie is involved. And we'll get more into this later. But do remember that she told the dispatchers that she did fight him off. Like, she made it sound as if she knew she did it, she woke up from it, she fought him off, and then he went out into the utility room. Anyway, when she's on the phone talking to the dispatcher about the whole situation, she makes it a point to say that she picked up the knife. She also says not only did she pick up the knife, but she makes it a point to mention, oh my God, they could have gotten prints off of that, which is exactly what I would be thinking and saying if I had done it. The huge question becomes, if you wake up and your children are covered in blood and been stabbed and you fought off some crazy man who's in your house and you followed him into the utility room and you find a bloody knife, would you pick it up? I think I would. I don't know why I would, but I think I would pick it more just kind of like, when something that bizarre happens, you're probably just trying to figure out what the hell is going on. So I would just pick it up out of sheer, trying to piece this whole thing together. Does that make sense? But anyway, the first phone call came into the dispatcher at 2:30, and the first officer arrived on the scene at 2:35. Police drew their weapons and canvassed the entire crime scene, which was covered in blood. You guys, the scene, the pictures I have seen of the crime scene are just horrific. Like, you can't even imagine what must have happened in order for the amount of blood, how it got everywhere. It's insane. But they're canvassing the scene. They're making sure that the intruder is definitely no longer in the house, and they realize he clearly is not. Unfortunately and sadly, Devin was announced dead on arrival, and Damon is immediately rushed to Baylor Medical Center. When the paramedics arrive to take care of the little boys, they then realize that Darlie's throat has been severely cut. She has, she's been deeply cut on her arms. There is one stab in her upper shoulder. Her arms are covered in bruises. But there's no signs to indicate that she has any markings on her hand consistent with stabbing someone. So in a lot of cases of people stabbing other people, especially to the degree that these poor little boys were stabbed, what ends up happening is when someone's holding a knife and they plunge it into something, especially once there's a large amount of blood happening, their hand will almost always kind of slip down the blade and they'll end up with some cuts on their hands. Darlie had nothing of the sort. The gash on Darlie's neck missed her carotid artery by millimeters. Your carotid artery, if that thing gets cut, it's done, you're dead, it's over. So when Darlie is at the hospital, doctors are telling her family and her loved ones that she is extremely lucky to be alive because of the nature of her wounds, particularly the one that's on her neck. Investigator Jim Crone, who has investigated over 4,000 crime scenes, is called to the scene. And the bulk of his analysis of this crime scene was the focus of one of the, I think it was a 2020, like I said, documentary or episode that was aired in the early 2000s. That episode was called Silent Witnesses because Jim Crone says that the crime scene is the silent witness to what really happened. So this guy's kind of like top of his game. You know, this is the man you call to figure stuff out. So let's backtrack a little bit to the utility room. As I said, the utility room went into the garage. That is the way that Darlie believes he exited the house, into the utility room and through the garage. The garage had a screen window. The screen had been cut in a T-shaped fashion. That is believed to be the way that the murderous piece of shit who did this exited and entered the house. Now, Jim Crone looks at this, takes one look at it, and says that it doesn't make any sense that anyone trying to escape a crime scene, enter a crime scene, whatever, would cut a screen that way, because it was cut in a T shape, which means in order to get into it, you have to try to get in through like the split. So what you would imagine someone would do is if there's a screen in front of them that they need to cut, they would probably cut the bottom of it so they could peel up the screen and come in that way, not cut it down the middle where the screen's going to fall to each side and then try to get in that way. It's not impossible to do it that way. It's not impossible for someone to do it like that. It's just Jim Crone said that it's very inconsistent with most home invasions and burglaries. They also found it extremely odd that some of Darlie's very nice jewelry was sitting on the counter and it was not touched. Oh my gosh, you guys. I don't know how long you've been watching me, but Coconut Grove has been one of my, look how much of it's gone. It's broken. Oh no, I hope NARS didn't stop making this. I bought this years ago. It is my favorite eyeshadow. I use it all the time. They also found it extremely odd that the knife came from a butcher's block in the Routier kitchen. The general belief being that most people who attempt violent crimes or burglaries, home invasion, things like that, do not wait until they arrive at a crime scene to ascertain a weapon. Which also harkens back to the whole thing of Darlie saying, oh, they could have got prints off of that. It's a big reason that set off some red flags for everybody. It felt it was her way of just immediately trying to explain why her prints would have been on the knife. So investigator Crone said that within 30 minutes of arriving to the scene, he knew something wasn't right. Apparently, when Darlie woke up from surgery, she did not ask about her children, and that was thought of to be extremely odd, which once again, like, I mean, I'm curious as to how long after surgery they're talking, because the only surgery I've ever had, I mean, I was completely out of my mind for like 15, 18 hours. I mean, that's what I mean when I say it's just these standards that people put on others for how they should act in a completely abnormal, crazy situation. I don't know how much credence I give to that, but I mean, I guess I can understand that is a little bit suspicious. They found it extremely odd that Darlie could not describe the face of the man who attacked her and her boys, even though she said she saw him walk away and her body was covered in defensive wounds, indicating she had clearly fought with this man. You guys, I'm trying to get out of wearing super, super long eyelashes, and I'm kind of learning that finding the perfect pair of eyelashes is like finding the perfect pair of jeans. Like, they have to fit right, they have to go with everything. Like, give me a break. Okay, so a few more odd things about the crime scene. The couch that Darlie was sleeping on had no blood evidence on it, meaning this huge struggle that Darlie was involved in that led to her having this massive cut on her throat, all the stabs on her arms. She had bruises all over her body. There is no blood on the couch, which is where this struggle supposedly took place, and that was a huge red flag for everyone investigating the scene. There was also no blood leading from the couch to the utility room where Darlie said she saw the perpetrator exit where she found the knife. So that also doesn't make a lot of sense either, because if someone has been in this huge like altercation with someone, or if a murderer who is ostensibly covered in their victim's blood, it makes no sense that there wouldn't be any, even if it was just from Darlie walking from the couch to the utility room where the perpetrator supposedly exited the scene. So when they're investigating the crime scene, they realize there is some blood evidence at the base of the sink, even though Darlie herself never made any mention of the fact that she went anywhere near the sink. After they found the blood at the base of the sink, where Darlie made no mention of being anywhere near, they decided to spray the sink with luminol. And when they did, they realized that not only had the sink come in contact with blood, but it had at one point been completely covered in blood and then cleaned up. So the question became at that point, did Darlie stab her children and then cut her own throat standing over the sink? Now, I'm not saying that's impossible. What I am saying is, if somebody wanted to fake a crime scene like supposedly she has done, why would she cut her throat over the sink when she's trying to say that she was attacked on the couch? That just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I've never tried to stage a crime scene, so I don't know what goes into one's mind when you are doing that. But to me, it would seem like if I'm claiming I had to fight off an intruder, that I would want my blood to be found where I supposedly had fought off said intruder. Like, what would have been the benefit of cutting my throat over the sink? Police said that Darlie's story changed 3 different times, always in relation to where the perpetrator was when she woke up, or where he left the crime scene from. So the theory was essentially that the perpetrator would have left through the garage and then escaped over the back gate and ran through an alley behind the Routier house. But once again, this became somewhat of an issue because the gate behind the Darlie Routier house was 6 feet tall. There was no evidence that it had been opened or shut, which I just don't know what evidence that would look like. If someone shut a gate behind them, I don't know how you would know that. But the gate was 6 feet tall, so they said that they found it pretty unlikely that the perpetrator would have jumped the fence in order to flee the crime scene. However, in an alleyway about 75 feet behind the Routier home, a bloody sock containing one of the boys' blood was found. For some reason, investigator Jim Crone also thought the sock was a red flag. Apparently, he believed that it was very, very clear because of the placement of the sock that what Darlie did was stab the boys, run outside, drop the sock, come inside, and then slit her own throat. But that presents more questions than it does answers to me again, because in what world, if you were trying to stage a crime scene, would you risk at all being seen doing something like that? Like, what possible benefit could you gain? You might as well just leave that whole part out. If you had to risk being seen doing it, like, that's just bananas to me that they thought that was even more evidence that she had planted it. That sounds like a bad plan. So Jim Crone, I'm sorry if I'm saying his name incorrectly, said that there wasn't one single piece of evidence that suggested that Darlie did this. It was a combination of all the things together that led him to believe she had stabbed her boys and then faked her own near death, which, once again, so risky considering how close that friggin' cut on her throat was to her carotid artery. But again, you have to remember that this was very close to that Susan Smith case of the mom who said someone kidnapped and drowned her children when she, in fact, herself had done it. It was just kind of like a panic in the air and a general state of suspicion around the situation because how close it was to the Susan Smith case. And I mean, I get it. Like, once you see something like that, you can't ever really take that kind of stuff for granted. But at the same time, if a case that has nothing to do with this situation is swaying your opinion so much to believe something that it just doesn't make any sense. Like I said, it doesn't make sense to me that if Darlie did it, she would risk killing herself. I don't know. So a few days after the murders, a news crew came to see Darlie Routier and her family visiting her son's grave. This would end up being a huge deal in the case, this footage that was shown. So on this news segment, what you see is Darlie and her family, also her family, not just her, kind of singing happy birthday to the boys. They actually sprayed silly string on the graves of the boys. And this was huge. Like, this was all over the news. People felt that somehow this was irrefutable proof that Darlie had done this. And honestly, I remember seeing this footage around, it had to have been around 2000, 2001 when this first 2020 episode came out. Because what you also have to understand, and I should have said this in the beginning, when I very first read the book, Precious Angels, that I'm telling you about when I was like 14 or so, I read it and walked away being like, oh, she's guilty as the day is long. Like, she did this shit. There's no doubt about it. And then I saw the silly string footage on, the aforementioned 2020 special. And that made it even more clear to me that she did it. And I can't explain why, because it was such a long time ago that I saw it for the first time. But it just seemed like such an odd and disrespectful thing to do to someone's grave. However, like, when you think about it from the aspect of this woman, lost her sons, and she went to the gravesite to kind of have a memorial service. The boys loved silly string. Like, she just kind of thought she was doing something fun and silly that they would like to celebrate their lives. Like, I understand how that might not be the way everyone would handle the situation, but that silly string video ended up being the biggest deal in this case. It's kind of wild. It was perceived by most people as dancing on the boys' graves. 11 days after the deaths of Damon and Devin, Darlie is arrested for their murders. Devin was 6 and Damon was 5. At the time of the arrest, and still to this day, there is no belief whatsoever by anybody involved that Darren, Darlie's husband and the boy's father, could have possibly had anything to do with this at all. It was all Darlie all the time from the very beginning. So the main argument in this extremely circumstantial case that the state has against Darlie is that she is, quote, very materialistic and very self-centered. They depicted her as kind of a pampered trophy wife who was losing access to the lifestyle she had become accustomed to because her husband's computer business was starting to fail. What's really irritating about this is that I kind of feel like Darlie was shamed and looked down upon because she was just a little more extra, a little more flamboyant. Like, she had big blonde hair and big fake boobs and liked nice things and was very into her appearance, which, like, I am so tired personally of that being some sort of indication of a bad woman. Like, that is somehow automatically synonymous with someone being self-centered, materialistic, this, that, and the third, when some people just like to look fleeky. I don't know. Like, that drove me crazy. One of the jurors themselves said that. I think more than one said that. When I watched the more recent 2020 episode, they just painted her out like they just sounded like haters. Like, somehow the fact that she looked the way that she looked and she liked the things that she liked meant that she was capable of murdering her 2 sons. I think that's bullshit. But around the time that the murders happened, financial records would indicate that the Routiers were not in a good way financially. I think that they were supposedly 2 months behind on their mortgage, which Darren would later go on to say was not true. And then they were also kind of drowning in a little bit of credit card debt. But here's the thing with that. Unless I'm missing something, I do not understand what murdering her children would have done to get them more money. I've never seen anything that suggested that there was a life insurance policy out on the boys. So I don't know why killing the boys would get her materialistic life back. That doesn't make any sense at all. Darlie and Darren both have said many times in the years since that they had a good marriage. There wasn't trouble in paradise. There was no reason to believe that Darlie would do something like this. And the only exception to that would be that the prosecution said that Darlie had tried to take her own life in the months leading up to the murders because they found an entry in her diary where they said it was a suicide note, like a full-blown, I'm going to kill myself suicide note. But Darren and other people in Darlie's family and Darlie herself said that she was not, in fact, intending to act on those feelings. Like, here's the thing. I myself have struggled with suicidal thoughts in my life. I actually have written suicide notes before. I mean, this was a long time ago. But if someone were to assume that because I wrote a suicide note, I was absolutely going to carry out with ending my own life, that would have been just untrue because I didn't do it. You know, I don't think it's fair to assume that because they found this in her diary, and it had been months before, and it was also on the heels of her 7-month-old son being born. She had been battling and dealing with postpartum depression, which if none of you guys have ever had postpartum depression before, you might not know, it's extremely debilitating. It's extremely scary. It's extremely serious. And it's not something that I think is discussed enough or talked about openly enough. And I'm sure it definitely wasn't talked about openly and honestly enough back in the mid 90s in Texas. Like, it's insane to me that they think they can link these two events together, but they did. They're trying to say that Darlie was already suicidal, so she decided to murder her kids and kill herself. But at the same time, they're also saying that she's doing this because she wants her fancy life back. I don't know. I don't even feel like their argument is solidified at all around what her motive would have been. But they continue. The prosecutors, that is, continue to maintain that Darlie did this and attempts to hold on to the high life, which, once again, I truly don't understand how that was conducive to holding on to the high life. Because even if the idea was, we can't afford these two kids, like, losing a child, you know, funerals, all the things that go into that gonna cost you money too. It doesn't make any sense for that to be a solution to any problem. I just don't understand. I don't understand. Nobody has ever made it clear to me through books, through articles, through all the specials I've watched, why that would make any sense to do in order to maintain a fancy pants high life that she supposedly was damned and determined to hold on to. But what the fuck ever. You guys, I'm very biased, I told you. I don't think she did this, so I'm gonna argue every point. Darlie's lawyers said that the prosecution picked out who they thought was guilty and then did whatever they had to do to make that theory work. The defense was very confident that they were gonna get an acquittal. Like, they were not worried about this. They felt like there's no motive, there's no confession, there's no evidence linking Darlie to the murder of her sons. Like, they're just not sweating this very much. But the trial inevitably became a total media circus. And the author of the book that I would later go on to read was actually there for the trial herself. She said it was standing room only. You couldn't even go to the bathroom because you would most likely lose your place. Like, it was bananas. So when the state goes to make its case, they said that fragments from the garage window screen that had been cut had been found on a second knife in the Routier house. They believe that it meant that Darlie had obviously staged the crime scene, that she cut the screen, stabbed her sons with the other knife, ran down the alley, dropped the sock, came back in the house, slit her throat, and then called 911. But even with that theory, and as allegedly rock solid as it was, still, the most damning evidence in the whole thing was the damn silly string video. That's what the jurors, the prosecution, everyone was really clinging to as some sort of, like, rock hard, irrefutable evidence that this woman had murdered her two children and almost slit her own throat to the point of taking her life. The defense argued that Darlie could have not have had the presence of mind to stage the scene, and the fact that she would, once again, as I said a little while ago, be risking the chance of being seen planting that sock is a huge hole in the argument that the prosecution was trying to make. Once again, no witnesses, no confession, and no clear motive at all. But unfortunately, against the advice of Darlie's lawyers, Darlie did end up taking the stand. Apparently, in cases like this, for the most part, lawyers will hardcore try to stop their clients from taking the stand unless, they think that the person of interest would hold up extremely well under questioning. So a lot of people feel like the nail in the proverbial coffin for Darlie was her eagerness to take the stand, because she did not hold up very well under questioning. The prosecution felt as if she kind of kept changing her story. Like, if the evidence or something she wanted to say couldn't be explained, she would say that she just couldn't remember it. So the trial went on for 5 weeks. They were only going to charge her with the death of the 5-year-old, because in Texas, murdering someone who is 5 or younger, or under the age of 6, whatever the case may be, is considered a capital offense and will result in the death penalty, which is what the state wanted. They wanted her to get the death penalty. So, as you guys probably can all surmise, she was found guilty. So remember, guys, I told you there was a book I read about the case many, many years ago, and that the author of that book, Precious Angels, was present in the courtroom during the hearing. She would later go on to say, and I don't know how long after the conviction this was, but she said that a source called her and showed her photos of Darlie that were not presented at trial. And she said that prior to seeing those photos, and for the majority of the time that, you know, she has been made aware of the case, that she was very convinced that Darlie was absolutely guilty. It was no doubt in her mind that they got the right person. But upon seeing those pictures, it completely changed her perception of the situation. The pictures that she saw, she said, changed her mind because of the nature of the defensive wounds on her and the nature of the bruises. She said it would have been absolutely impossible, which I friggin' agree, that Darlie could have put these bruises on her, like on herself this way. And while that makes me happy to hear, because like I said, I don't think she did it, the prosecution and the defense would later go on to say that all of the photos that this author is saying that she saw that helped her change her mind were actually very, very present at the trial. But the one piece of evidence that was not admissible into court that most people think would have changed this outcome of the trial was the fact that, remember the silly string video? By the way, for lips, I actually picked this up for my sister. I meant to leave it with her because she wore this on her wedding day when I did her makeup, but it kind of made its way back up here with me. Sorry, sis. This is the one of the NARS liquid lipsticks in the color Under My Thumb. That's what I'm going to wear today. She wore it on her wedding. She wore it all day. It didn't get crusty or gross. She said it was really comfortable. So I know I'm on a no-buy, but I get to try this new lipstick, so that's kind of cool. The lip liner I'm using is 10C from Makeup Forever. Okay, so I just put this lipstick on. I don't know that, this is the first time I've ever worn it. I don't know that it's particularly more comfortable than any other liquid lip I've worn before. I haven't been doing really good with lip balm lately, so that could be why. I'm not changing out of this robe, so I hope you guys don't judge me, but I'm just going to wrap this up. We were talking about the silly string tape. A tape that was not shown to the jury that many people feel would have changed the outcome of the trial was a tape that police took. It was a police surveillance tape of Darlie and her family moments before the footage of her spraying silly string on the graves was found. It was a heartfelt, deeply emotional memorial service. Darlie was clearly upset, inconsolable, lots of crying. Then the news got the shot after all of that of her spraying the silly string on the grave, which is such a universal kind of thing, isn't it? Like, when you only see a tiny bit of something, it is so easy to make opinions and pass judgments on people, but without the full story, you're really not being fair. You're not even being like reasonable about the situation. That's why the whole silly string issue to me is nuts. That people actually felt like that was the most, and it's been said many times, this is not an opinion. People in the jury said it, the prosecution said it. A lot of people genuinely felt like that silly string video was the irrefutable proof that she did this, when in fact there was more to the story than meets the eye. So the reason that tape could not be admitted into evidence was because it was taken as surveillance style. In other words, they didn't know they were being filmed, so they felt like it couldn't be admitted into the trial. It's absolutely ridiculous. So shortly after Darlie was convicted and in prison, her family reached out to a Texas millionaire named Brian Pardo. He had spent his own money in the past defending Texas inmates, trying to get them out if he felt like they had been wrongfully convicted. They hired a new lawyer named Stephen Loesch, who has since passed away. But Stephen Loesch had a very different take on the situation, and Darlie's family wanted nothing to do with him after he kind of came out and said what he thought happened. And this is what I believe happened too. And what's driving me crazy is I found something on YouTube 3 years ago, I think it was. It was either like a special or it was an interview. It was something that said that what they believed happened was Darren had actually hired someone to kill Darlie so that they could get the insurance payout for her death. And it just went wrong because the boys ended up being present. And I mean, the only reason that doesn't make any sense is that Darren knew the boys were down there. He spent time with Darlie before he went upstairs and went to sleep. I don't know. I don't know the details, but that story makes a lot more sense to me. I believe there was a situation where Darren essentially admitted to that. He went on to later say something to the effect of like, I admitted it because I was told if I did admit it, it would get her out of prison. But outside of those speculations and assumptions about his involvement in it, Darren has never been seriously investigated for the death of his children, which I think is just absolutely insane. I wish I could remember exactly what I found in that special. I'm going to try really hard to find it, and I'll find some way to link it. But the evidence that I saw and what I saw in that special as a whole really solidified for me that Darren had more to gain out of the situation than Darlie did. Because as I just said, like, unless I am missing a huge key point of evidence, no life insurance policies or anything existed in forms of payouts to be gained if the children were murdered. This makes no sense to me. Darlie is still on death row for this, if I'm not mistaken. She filed an appeal in 2001. That appeal was rejected. But I believe that as of right now, there is a judge who is allowing new DNA evidence to be tested because the resources were not available in 1996 when she was tried. I mean, the trial happened super, super fast. I believe her defense attorney said that typically when you have a death penalty case, my brain just totally stopped working. You usually get a year or so to prepare, but it was something like within 5 or 6 months they had her on the stand. So that's kind of unheard of. But what do you guys think about this story? I think it's absolutely insane. I don't think she did it. I don't think she had anything to gain from doing it. And sure, yeah, there's a chance that she just went Looney Tunes and decided to do this, but there had never been any other evidence or reasons to believe that she was mentally unstable. She had no history of violence or mental illness. Like, I just feel like the most likely answer is probably the correct one, and that is that somebody stood to benefit from Darlie's death, and unfortunately 2 innocent boys were lost in the shuffle of all that. So anyway, yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed this month's True Crime Makeup Time. Let me know if you want to see more of them. I do like doing them. I have a lot of cases like this that just keep me up at night a little bit. So thank you so much for all of you who are members of the Patreon in the month of November. Looking forward to the December content. I am very sorry it took so long to get this out. But as I told you guys many times, I went to Georgia for my sister's wedding and came home and got horribly sick. So there was no getting in front of a camera for a good week after that. So anyway, I will catch you guys in the next one. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Bye.